TV umpire to director, we have a player review. Can we rock and roll, please?
Hello and welcome to Bits and Pieces, the friendliest cricket podcast. I am your host, Prashant TP, and I'm here to ask you if you have ever been to or hosted a kid's birthday party. There's cake and fun and happiness and energy. There's that kid wearing a crown style party hat running around, screaming and whooping with infectious enthusiasm. There's that other kid who's not sure if he wants to fit in or stand out, whether he wants to be accepted by the other kids or whether he wants to impress the parents. But he's having fun too. There's a sugar spike and then there's a crash. It's getting late. None of the kids want to leave. They have to, of course, but they don't want to. Suddenly, they turn cranky. No one wants to accept that the party is over. India have just won one of their last 8 tests. They've lost six, three of those to New Zealand at home, and were lucky to escape with a draw in Brisbane. The party is well and truly over. But what a party it was! Over the last 10 years, we have witnessed a period of prolonged, consistent excellence, and maybe, dare I say, even greatness. We have witnessed an era of truly unprecedented Indian dominance. And so we thought it would be fun to reminisce a little, to travel back over the last 10 years and revisit the highs and the lows. Here to talk about Indian cricket's greatest ever birthday party are Nitin, Hank, Vishal, and Tareque. Four of the last guests to leave, kicking and screaming, clutching onto their party favors, clinging onto their memories. Say hi, guys.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, hi.
No, so I was asking PDP, does this mean that Jasprit Bumrah's Player of the Tournament award was the return gift?
Exactly that. That's actually a good place to start to talk about how things were maybe at the start of this decade that we're discussing. We had just come off 8-0. How do you guys think that compares with the recently concluded 1 out of 8?
I can go first. And in the last pod itself, I said that 8-0 was far more painful and excruciatingly painful than this loss. I guess glossed over, if I may use Iman's colorful language, by the fact that Australia also has currently not such a great team. So, the fact that we got allowed to within spitting distance of a draw in the series makes this loss much less painful than the 8-0. We got away lightly in this one. So, yeah, either way, but for me, 8-0 is far more hurtful.
In an alternate universe, right, India actually loses in Brisbane, but manages to draw MCG. Or who knows, Sam Constance actually gets out in the second over at MCG and the test match pans out in a very different way. But since you brought up the 2011 comparison, Hank, and also the fact that Australia themselves are a flawed team now, back in 2011, India were rolled over by Ben Hilfenhaus and Peter Siddle. That was not a good Australian team either, right?
Yeah.
It's just that the Indian team was far worse. That Australian team was far, far, far worse than the current Australian team, which of course is going through its own throes of regeneration. It's a brilliant team otherwise, right? India were at a completely different low back in 2011. I know that the fact that legends are retiring or on the verge of being kicked out makes this reminiscent of 2011. The series actually reminded me more of India's tour of England in 2014, right, where they won the first, or rather they drew the first test at Headingley, which was that high-scoring draw. They won at Lords with Rahane's brilliant century and all of that, and England were done at that point. Anderson was on fire. Alistair Cook was on the verge of being dropped. Very similar to the kind of crisis that Australia were facing after losing at Perth here. And then England comes back and absolutely smashes India for the next 3 test matches, right? And win the series 3-1. And by the end of it, Anderson is a hero, Cook is a hero, Jadeja is a pantomime villain, and India can't get any runs on the board. They're getting bowled out for 120, 130.
Was that the one where they went to Southampton and did very badly as well, or was it Durham?
They lost everywhere, right? I think Rahane and Dhoni were the only ones even managing to put bat on ball by the end of that series. This reminded me of that, and in the sense that it felt like India's wheels slowly came off towards the end of the series. The selections were off, the man management was off, the leadership was in all kinds of turmoil and all of that. You said you started off the decade from 2011, but we are in 2025, so technically the decade started in 2015. this is definitely the lowest low, and it perfectly ends that epoch as well, because the 2014 England series happened just 10 years back.
No, absolutely. And also, I think the reason why this 10-year thing makes sense, it makes sense because in 2015, 1st Jan 2015 is when MS Dhoni gives up the captaincy. And that's when Virat Kohli takes over. And he says that, we're going for the win and all that, but he actually walks the talk through his entire tenure, plays five bowlers, goes for the win every single time. So it just makes sense to sort of begin there because we had just come off a captain whose main response to any given situation seemed to be attrition, seemed to be pragmatism. It was never adventurism. And so, 2015, 2016, it really was a breath of fresh air.
Towards the end of his career, we're going into this point where after saving a match at the MCG, he actually saved the match. He played for like, I don't know, I can't remember, but for an hour, 2 hours or something, saved the match. That evening he retires from Test cricket, middle of a series. And then from then on, the Kohli years, that start, he makes some statements about how we would like to play the game. He started in Sydney. If I remember right, that's where he flipped the bird at the crowd and then started his captaincy journey.
No, that was the previous tour.
Correct.
That was the
previous tour. But I'm saying, yes, Sydney was where he flipped the bird. Sydney was where he started his captaincy. And Sydney, ironically, might be the place where he's buried. I hope not. But there's so many full circles over there.
I just wanted to point out one thing about Dhoni's test credentials. I love this stat. So Anil Kumble has more Sena centuries than MS Dhoni. Anil Kumble has more Sena centuries than R. Ashwin, guys. Who's the greatest Indian spinner? Anil Kumble has as many Sena centuries as Rohit Sharma, MS Dhoni, and R. Ashwin put together. You can add more people. You can add Ravindra Jadeja to that, I think. No, you can't. I think he got some Sena. But anyway, yeah. Oh, it gets funnier once you add Ajit Agarkar to the mix, guys.
Well, why don't you add it? Because Agarkar has got the Lord century and
got the Lord century.
And Kumble has got the Oval century. Dhoni has got 1 century in Faisalabad. Yes.
I think between all of them, we've covered pretty much all of the honor boards everywhere between Jadeja, Ashwin, everybody else. So collectively, they did a good job.
But thoughts, Vishal.
Sorry, I'm the tangential. I'm the guy who will keep going off on tangents.
Tangential Tejnarayan.
Just one thing before since Vishal brought up honors board. After the Sydney Test match ended, right? I was still in Sydney for a couple of days, and I happened to go for this Final Word live podcast event where they launched Glenn Maxwell's new book, and Simon Katich was the chief guest. Okay, or not chief guest. He was part of the panel, and it was a very fun interaction with all these guys. So since we were talking about Sydney. One of the discussion points with Simon Katich was the famous Sydney Test match from 2004, where Tendulkar, didn't play the cover drive. India scored 700 odd runs and didn't famously push hard enough for a win, and hence ended up drawing the series, right? But the point that Katich made was Brett Lee was bowling in that Test match, right? And everyone had really crappy figures. Brett Lee had 4 wickets at some point, and Lee's only hope towards the end of that innings was, please, I don't want to get a 5th wicket because otherwise these figures will go on the honours board and they will look ugly. Like 5 for 200 type thing. But sorry, Vishal, over to you. This had nothing to do with anything, but yeah.
No, I think just in terms of the decade, I feel where we are at the moment, which is we've lost 8 tests, stings a bit harder because I feel we were a lot closer to feeling like, we're pretty invincible, especially at home. But even in away conditions as well, like we were coming in as, I wouldn't say favorites into the BGT, but then we won the last 2. And for Australia, it's a home series. Even then, to have this much hope on India to win at the start was not something we've ever had. We've been whitewashed in the past, 2014. And I think in that decade, what felt sufficient was to just go out there and win at least 1. If we won 2, then great, but never dreamt of a series win really then. So, but now to get so close, like we've won 2 of the BGTs and then now to lose in this fashion and then to lose at home, which I don't know, the last time we lost, to now be in this state feels a lot harder, especially after the high that we've just had. So I think it just stings a lot harder that we're so close to becoming such a strong team overseas and then suddenly to have such a slump. So yeah, to me, this feels a lot harder than the 4-0 whitewashes or the 3-0 whitewashes we used to have like a decade ago as such. But yeah, and I think we started off, obviously, Kohli started off with like a really good captaincy run, and then we almost pulled off that remarkable chase. We had Ashwin emerge as a bit of a lower order batter. I think 2016 in the West Indies was when he scored his first couple of centuries in that series as well. Yeah, so I think at the start of the decade is when both Kohli's high as well as like our lower order batting also started to rise up at the same time. And then this was inevitable, right? At some point, we were going to have to stop depending on the lower order to save us. So I think that time has now just come, sadly.
It's interesting that you bring up West Indies. Obviously, the tours, the matches that we remember more are the ones in Australia, the ones in England, the sort of higher profile series. But actually, over the last 10 years, India has done much, much, much better in places like West Indies and Sri Lanka than anyone else has. So, for example, Sri Lanka is actually mind blowing. Over the last 10 years, they played 6 tests there, won 5, and only lost 1. Like, even Sri Lanka is not that good in Sri Lanka. I mean, they've been
and
immense.
and even that loss was, Dinesh
Some
Chandra was
freak
looking
innings.
extremely
Yeah,
lucky.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even in the West Indies, I mean, if you look at the last decade compared to the decade before, West Indies have actually been stronger in from 2015 to 25 than they were from 2005 to 2015. They've actually not been easy to beat in the West Indies. So, for example, I think England, their win loss in the West Indies was about, I think, zero point 0.3 or something. It's quite low, even in this period. And
Yeah.
India were absolutely spectacular. Tariq, your personal favorites from Kohli's captaincy?
Since we do not get enough representation of this particular person who was once explained cricket by KP on Graham Norton's show, I will begin with a line from Taylor Swift that it was the end of a decade and it was the start of an age. So basically, that's what that's what 2015 felt like. I think, particularly, I remember. Personally, because I had actually just come back from the US, so I was out of touch with cricket for about like 3 years because I followed very little. So I remember the home series against South Africa to begin with because I was there at a couple of those tests. But the one that was my favorite was because a place where we had seen India lose so many test matches and the occasional win was like a huge deal is, I would say, South Africa. And specifically, I think the 2018 series where I think we lost 2-1, Bumrah's debut series. So
Yep.
the Wanderers test is my favorite because in '97 famously Wanderers was the one that got away because thanks to Cullinan and rain and a little bit of bad luck. So I would say that test match is a microcosm of a lot of what happened during that this entire decade, I would say, because I think the template was the same. In the second innings, I think it was like Shami and Bhuvneshwar Kumar with very valuable lower order knocks that
Yeah.
kind of got India out of trouble, set South Africa a big enough target for I think Bumrah to get like his first fifer to get India to win. So one of my favorite wins of that era because it kind of showed the level of confidence. I remember the first test I was very hopeful of, but India collapsed in the first innings. And Hardik Pandya came in with a terrific knock after India were like 7 down for like some
90
80,
or
100 runs or
something.
something. Yeah, some 90 odd runs. So I think that series was the first time I believed that, okay, this is a team that is built very differently from a lot of teams that we have seen before or we've seen growing up. And you could kind of tangibly feel that no matter what the situation, what the conditions, they're always in with a shout. So what Vishal was talking about, that even going to Australia after that, with the chance that they could, even potentially win a test or tests multiple, and then obviously win series and win back-to-back series. It kind of set the tone, and then I guess we started taking things for granted until we got here, where we realized that wait, it just comes with an expiry date.
That test is a brilliant one that you brought
Yeah.
up, right? It reminds, there are so many themes from that test match, like
Yep.
Tariq mentioned, which kept echoing over the next decade. To start with, it was the greenest of green pitches. And if I
Yep.
remember right, India won the toss and chose to bat in the test. I might be wrong. And it was Kohli kind of saying, I don't care what the conditions are, right? The whole conditions, Baad mein ja conditions pitch, the whole Shastri Kohli take. And then Pujara comes out and plays 50 dot balls before he gets off the mark.
Yep.
And there was this very, very nice video of him playing every single ball, leaving, right? The 50 balls, tuck, tuck, tuck. There was this
Yeah.
1 minute video that was doing the rounds, and it was almost therapeutic to watch that. He then goes on to score a 50, if I remember right, a very, very slow 50.
Yeah.
Kohli at the other end scores a very fluent half century. Kohli in that phase of his career was batting on a different pitch all the time anyway. And this was on day one when the pitch was at its best, supposedly, because it was about to deteriorate into a complete dung heap in a couple of days. And the umpires were about to take India off, or asked India if they wanted to go off because the light was poor and there were bouncers being bowled. Rahane took a couple of blows. And Rahane actually says, no, we want to continue batting in the second innings, right? Where India were trying to set a target. And that was, again, a very, very unusual thing, a very new thing to see, where India were not actually taking the opportunity to get off the field, but continuing to grind South Africa out there. That was another one. And then Bumrah, that was of course Bumrah's debut series. He came into that series with 0 first-class cricket in the last 1 year or 6 months, and it was a very controversial decision. I remember we all panned the decision, or at least I definitely panned that decision to play Bumrah. Like, ye kya hai? Why are we playing IPL players randomly in Test
You
cricket?
said it.
without
I
testing
remember
them
this.
out
I
in first
remember
class?
that you said,
I did.
why is IPL performance, and I should have said that, but you said it. I remember that.
Especially because it was also in South Africa where you need to bowl different lengths. And if you remember, in that very first test, India bowled poor lengths on the first day, and that pretty much cost them the series. South Africa got away to a far bigger score in that first test than they should have. But by the time the third test came along, Bumrah had, as Bumrah tends to do, had recalibrated the lengths he needs to bowl. And they were magnificent in that test match, Shami and Bumrah, right? So, yeah. All these are things that would continue to echo into the future. In that sense, Rahane had been dropped also, if I remember right, in the first couple of tests. Again, very controversial calls. I think to play Rohit Sharma or something. And then Rahane comes back for the third test and scores a 50. I think both of them played the third test. Something. Yeah.
No, the other thing that I remember from this test is that India went with an all-pace attack on this surface. I don't think either Jadeja or Ashwin was considered. It was as you're saying, is a very up and down kind of pitch. And if I remember, that's actually one of the last games I remember Bhuvi playing for India. He actually was. I mean, for me, the biggest kind of what if of that era is if Bhuvi had been fitter. WTC final against New Zealand. The ball is swinging. The New Zealand bowlers are getting consistently more swing than India, and I'm suddenly thinking, man, where's Bhuvi? I think was maybe the one toy that Kohli missed the most was probably a genuine out and out swing bowler.
I'll tell you what thought experiment. I'll tell you thought experiment. What I really miss is back in Durban, you should have had Gautam Gambhir as the coach. You would have played both Jadeja and Ashwin as specialist batsmen.
No.
It just puts in perspective how ridiculous the selection for the Sydney Test match was, right? Because a very similar pitch, if you think about it, this Sydney pitch and whatever India got in South Africa in the third test are very similar pitches. You could have argued that you needed an all-pace attack for this test.
Of course.
India didn't even have 5 pacers in the squad. I don't know what the squad.
You could have somehow scrambled 5 paces into the Harshit Rana and all those people could have been drafted in and so on. But
does Bharat Sundaresan bowl medium pace? Yeah, you could have.
Yeah.
We didn't have 5. I don't think we had 5 fast bowlers. Maybe we did. Did we? No, we didn't. I mean, with injuries and everything, Akash was not fit to play. Yeah. You had 4 fit fast bowlers. Anyway.
Well, 4 fit. If you can assume that Nitish Kumar Reddy is actually a fast bowler, which I guess I'm being unkindly.
I can't assume that.
But Nitu, this is 2000. So actually, if you look at the decade, right, 2015 to 25, it's actually a decade of 2 halves. So we're talking about the period of plenty, right? So if you look at India's batting during that period, I think they averaged collectively, India were collectively averaging in excess of 40 during that period. So in other words, they were on average scoring 400 runs in an innings.
Yeah.
The second half of that decade was a little more difficult for India's batters. I think that average of 40 dropped to less than 30, which means they're scoring less than 100 runs in innings. And they still managed to win test matches, even in that era. It goes to show how much of heavy lifting the bowling had to do during this entire period. So the period of this test was during the time when India could still bat. Pujara was doing well, when Kohli was doing well. And that's why I think that team that won the BGT in Australia in 2018, 17-18, I think that was actually the most complete team in the sense that you had strong batting, strong bowling.
I mean, the point that you made is I think, really valid from the point of view of moving forward, because in a sense you look back to look ahead, right? What were the good things about that team? And you hit the nail on the head, really, PDP was saying. What was it that made that team so good, right? And it was good.
I will.
But wait.
I will throw that to you, Hank.
Don't do any tangential Tyagarajan over here.
No tangent. This is straight chord that is going through the circle, not a tangent. So since PDP mentioned that was the 2018 team that won in Australia was the most complete Indian team. And Hank, you also agreed. So I'm going to put Hank on the spot and ask him, can you tell me who were India's openers in that series?
Was it Periscope?
Yes. Mayank Agarwal and Hanuma Vihari, if I remember right, were the openers by the end of the series. And the most complete Indian team.
But by the end of the series, I mean, we started with different openers, and then Periscope came in Melbourne and Sydney.
Who got dumped? I think Dhawan was dropped or something after the first cup.
Correct.
M. Vijay and Dhawan, I think, started. Or Rahul, I think opened. Rahul was
Rahul
dumped.
was there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Mayank Agarwal was drafted in, and he had a brilliant first
to complete the team. Yeah.
Well,
yes.
The point there is not just about, I mean, yes, you had these guys who were able to hit and play through the line and all that. But ultimately, you had one player in the middle who was rock solid in super form. Through that,
Ashwin.
And you had Pujara. The value, I made a statement after the 3-0 that we don't have players who have the ability to build an innings, and I was completely lampooned in the group for that. But to me, that is really what we are missing. And going forward, unless we have the player who's able to hold, and build an innings, maybe two, but one definitely. And that the value of Pujara, hugely underestimated in the current, crash, if you like, over the last 2 years or so. And unless we find something into the future that is something similar, we'll be in the same position talking about this 10 years from now.
So Hank, you're right. India needed a Pujara type player at the top. But I don't think India needed Pujara at the top, because Pujara was given a very, very long run and he had declined significantly. Yes. I think in this...
I'm not saying India needed Pujara in this series. Moving forward, correct. India needs a Pujara.
Correct. And I thought in this series, KL Rahul was designated to be the Pujara of the squad.
But look at what happened to him, right? He was shunted down the order when he was doing a fantastic job at the start. What was the thinking? So we need to really think about roles and what people do very, very carefully. As selectors.
In this era that we're talking about, like 2015 to 2025, teams were significantly scoring less. It is what they call a bowling era. Okay.
Yeah.
But India's averages have dropped more than anyone else's. Okay. So to put things in perspective, the figure that you cannot escape here is Virat Kohli. So Virat Kohli averaged 67 in the first half, when India was averaging 40. In the second half of that decade, Virat Kohli is averaging 30 and India are averaging 30. He's not picking up anyone's slack. The even more damning statistic is the fact that India's number 3 and number 4 over the last 5 years have averaged 32. Okay? This is the lowest amongst strong test playing teams. So you have England's number 3 and number 4 averaging in the 40s. You have Australia's number 3 and number 4 averaging in the 40s collectively.
As a response to that, right? India play half their test matches in India on pitches where they're obviously scoring low. What you have to see is all these other teams are not playing as many test matches in India, right? Where batting has been significantly difficult in the last in this era. You have to see what England's number 3 and 4 are averaging in India, what Australia's number 3. Collectively, what away batsmen number 3 and 4.
No. So hang on. It is true that it has gotten tougher to bat everywhere. Now, there are people who are saying that conditions in England have also become quote unquote more radicalized. So it's becoming harder to score even there, right? But yet you have number 3 and number 4 in England batting in those conditions, sometimes facing the new ball very early, doing better. So there is no getting around the fact that India's middle order has been underperforming for 5 years. There is no getting around that.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. All I'm saying is there's a certain way to slice and dice that, and you might come off with the observation that it has become tough to bat in Australia, in England, in South Africa, but you could club all those 3 conditions into a similar kind of, you need the same kind of skills to do well in those 3 countries, whereas you need a completely different set of skills to do well in India as a number 3 or number 4.
But that's interesting, right? Nitin. I mean,
team that's playing.
I take that, but if you combine
Yeah.
that with the fact that India did horribly in the 3-0 loss, whereas the New Zealand batsmen actually played, if not really well,
No,
competent.
no, that's fair. And to PDP's point, I'll say it's not just a decade of two halves; it's actually a decade of three pieces. The last 6 months are a completely different ballgame altogether. What happened
That's
against
true.
New Zealand, etc. You can't really club that with the rest of the decade where Pant was scoring, Jadeja was scoring, Rohit Sharma was scoring heavily. By the
Yep.
way, Rohit has more hundreds in this last 5-year phase than anyone else in Indian cricket. Right?
Yeah.
People don't give
In
him
India,
credit for
in
that now.
India, in India,
Everywhere, but yeah,
in
I
India,
mean, we just
and
Yeah.
established already that he has one Sena 100. So yes,
and
in India,
and in India,
pretty
the
much,
one
yes.
other thing is, and let's not forget, before the 3-0 crash against New Zealand, there was a test against Bangladesh where one of our favorites in the sport scored a century to literally, I mean, I wouldn't
Yeah,
say save India, but definitely push India into a winning position. Right? And but for that, who
yeah.
knows what would have happened? So there's lots of sandpapering that has happened. Shouldn't say sandpapering in a cricket podcast. Lots of glossing that's
No,
happened.
no, but also, Nitu, to answer your point, just like India's number 3 and 4 have been significantly lower have been averaging significantly lower than the others. The same is not true of numbers 6, 7, and 8. Okay, they're also playing half their tests in India, right? The conditions are tough even for them. Okay, but their average is more or less on par than many of these other sites. Okay, so that argument does not really hold good. I mean, there is an elephant in the room which I think has become even more apparent after this series.
By the way, this slump, obviously New Zealand and this series in Australia brought it home to roost. But if you go back even a little earlier, right, we almost lost a test match in Bangladesh
Yeah.
where Shreyas Iyer and
Ashwin.
Ashwin had to finish a chase. The other test against Bangladesh that you mentioned, where Ashwin and Jadeja rescue India on day one. Again, India were what, 100 for six or
Six.
something, right? And
Six
then
Yeah.
odd, yeah,
you
yeah.
had on day one in Chennai, and you don't want to be in that condition in Chennai when you're playing at home against Bangladesh of all teams. We had that Ollie Pope series again where you kept getting into trouble, and this was coming for a while, right? It was eventually
Yes.
someone was going to string all the ducks in a row and defeat India at home. It just happened
Yep.
to be the most unlikely team you would have imagined, which is Will Young and Tom Latham and co.
Horrible.
But
Yeah.
Glenn
this was
Phillips
coming,
also.
yeah, and Santner, yes.
The bowling, on the other hand, there has been almost no drop off at all through this decade. So they were averaging something like 23, 24 in the first half of the decade. And the second half of the decade, they are averaging 25. So that's not a huge difference as a test match goes. Whether you're bowling them out for 230 or whether you're bowling them out for 250 is not going to make an earth shattering difference. And you could argue that that is because India have been more ruthless with bowling changes than they have been with batting changes.
Oh,
You drop Ashwin, no, in Sena.
absolutely.
You drop, yeah, I mean, you're ruthless. So, yeah, would love to hear your thoughts, Vishal, and then Tareque, on batsmen v bowlers.
No, I
PDP
think
clearly saying, "They Hank and Nitin, shut up! You guys are talking all the time."
No, da, I
Which
can
is
say
no,
it. You will
but
never shut
since
up anyway.
PDP is a cutie, he says it nicely, and I agree.
Tangential Tyagaraja never shut up, never.
I have a take on this, but I'll come in the end.
tangential take. No, I think definitely agree. The only reason we have still performed well as a team is because our bowling has really kind of saved us. The average has we used to average, I think, in the mid 30s or even high 30s bowling wise before, but that's come down post 2015. Even in the two halves of 2015, it's remained consistent. Chopping and changing of bowlers has happened, I feel, yeah, quite much more liberally. I don't think we had any sort of big bowling stars that we've always had to worry about sort of keeping out. Of course, we ended up keeping Ashwin out of Sena. I don't know. I think one of the missed opportunities or what ifs would be Kuldeep Yadav for me, but he could have been somebody I was looking forward to seeing more of. But yeah, certainly like the amount of changes we just accepted in terms of bowling were sadly not the same as in batting. Like I think, in fact, the bowlers put in even if you look at that South Africa Test match, that the Johannesburg one, I think it was Bhuvaneshwar Kumar, who played a really good role in both the innings of that test match, if I remember, along with doing a really good job at the bowling. So, again, the top five in that Johannesburg test, I remember they didn't do really that well, but it was, again, Pujara and then somebody, like, again, Bumrah
They
scored like a
Kohli
couple
da.
of very. Kohli made 50, yes. Kohli made 50s, but then you had like a string of like one digit scores from the others. So, yeah, I think the bowlers certainly did more than their fair share of the job. Even if you look at the Adelaide test in 2018, which is, I think, my one of my favorite tests because I think it really set the tone for India doing well in that BGT. And if you remember, the first day we were coming off at about, I think, 128 for 6 or 130 for 6 or something like that. And it was like that typical first day in Australia, right? Like we are just not adjusting to conditions. Top overs blown away. Pujara still hanging in there, but we were pretty sure of getting bowled out for much lesser. And then we had Rohit Sharma of all people. I think it was at number 6 or something that he scored like some 2 3 sixes, got the momentum going, and India got to about 250. So yeah, I think it just became a tale of, and that's why I feel that starting of the decade, which was around 25 or 2015 and 2016, where yes, Kohli had a rise, but you also had the lower order developing their batting to such an extent where you had Ashwin suddenly scoring hundreds, you had Jadeja scoring well as well. It almost felt like the team started to need the lower order doing a lot more, and they delivered in bowling, they delivered in batting, but yeah, inevitably it had to sort of stop at some point, and it did.
I think so. Just continuing from Vishal's point, it became like a feature that the lower order had to bail out the score on so many occasions. And as far as the bowling goes, I mean, it's just you begin with an Ishant, Umesh Yadav, you have Shami, you have Bumrah, obviously, and then you had like Bhuvneshwar and a few others. So I think you would again another interesting like data slice would be to see how many of these quartet or quintet or triplet of bowlers were repeated across the tests, especially if like from one test to another. But there seemed to be like a different set of bowlers who were leading us to the wins. I think if we just take the wins in isolation, I am kind of willing to wager that maybe almost all of them have like different bowling attacks. It might be similar personnel, but in different combinations every single time, which I think speaks to the bowling depth and even the variety. Although the variety probably is a lot more subtle in the sense that there were a lot of pace bowlers coming on. Vishal mentioned Kuldeep, who probably did not get as many test matches. So we never really had. I don't think we've had a test match where we had, let's say, finger spinner, a wrist spinner, swing bowler, seam bowler, that kind of combo, or a bowling attack, which made this happen. But at the same time, those that you had variations within themselves, which were good enough to sort of get opposition out and good opposition out to fashion those wins, right? So yeah, I think even from a data point of view or from just like a perception point of view, I think it remained that the bowlers were setting up the test matches. But again, I know Nitin has a take, so I'm assuming he's going to go against the grain on that.
No, it's impossible to go against the grain, right? The Indian bowling in this last decade has been outstanding. There's no question about it. And like PDP mentioned right at the top, it has felt like we will find a bowler, right? If one bowler goes missing, we will find another bowler. If that person goes missing, we'll find another, and they will all be of the same quality. And this really came through with Siraj leading the attack in the BGT, right, after making his debut in Melbourne. I feel unfortunately that did not come through without a process in place, and I think that process, whatever it was, is as long ended. And what we have actually experienced in the last 3 or 4 years has been so whenever a change happens, right, the impact of that change appears with some inertia. You don't see it immediately, right? And I believe when Kohli and Shastri set that gauntlet and said we are going to go for wins, we are going to play fast bowlers, I think there was a very top down kind of philosophy that was embraced in Indian cricket at that stage, right? You obviously had Dravid and the ethos program. You had, I think, Lakshman and the NCA and the Pace Academy, and you had Bharat Tarun, I think, as the bowling coach. And there was a very clear alignment all the way from the top to the bottom to buy into that vision. And you had a factory line of amazing fast bowlers coming through, right? And some of them are not even like great fast bowlers, but they made it through the system. Let's say someone like a Saini, for instance, right, or a Karthik Tyagi might not be the greatest bowler, but they went through that process and came out as far better output than what they would have been if that process didn't exist. At some stage, right, when Shastri actually stepped down as coach and Dravid became coach, and Lakshman, I think, moved one step ahead, somebody else moved one step ahead, Bharat Tarun moved out of his role. I think that process ended at that stage. What you continue to enjoy in the last 3 or 4 years is the remnants of the good work that was done earlier, where you continue to have Siraj, Shami, and Bumrah coming together because they were already finished products that were produced during that age. I don't think that pipeline has continued to build, and you saw that in Australia this time, right? Where you're down to, I think, the fundamental reason I think India lost the series was the 3 or 4 fast bowlers India played were not anywhere near the quality of the 4 fast bowlers that Australia played throughout the series. And Bumrah actually flattered you. He made it look much closer than it actually was because Bumrah was bowling miles ahead of everyone else in that group. But everyone else, right? The Siraj, of course, matched up with Stark and all of that. But there was such a steep decline after that. And you weren't even sure who your third seamer is. Once you take Shami out, you don't know who that third seamer. It could have been any one of them. And I think Gambhir pretty much flipped the coin in every test match. Is it going to be Harshit? Is it going to be, Akashdeep? Or is it going to be this other guy, Prasidh Krishna? None of whom are of that quality, really. So I think that's where it's changing. And Ashwin and Jadeja, again, I've been told, for instance, right, like every era, you have 1 or 2 great Indian spinners who do well for the team. And as their career is coming to an end, there's a lot of chest thumping that happens saying, who's the next great spinner? Is our great spin tradition over? Right? It happened when Kumble and Harbhajan were finishing up. And people said, who's this Ashwin? He bowls something in the IPL, right? How is he a test quality bowler? We have seen how good he is in test cricket. Same with Ravindra Jadeja. In that sense, I am fairly confident that spin, you won't have the same problem. Somebody will show up again, right? Whether it is Koti, and you already have Kuldeep Yadav, who is, a very, very world-class bowler. I think the worry is more in the pace bowling department, where without this entire process and setup, you are not going to get that factory line again. And I think that factory line is done for now. It'll have to be rebuilt from scratch. You'll have to put the right people in place with the right vision buying into it. I don't know if it's
And that's the point, right? Pace bowling and bowling strength and bench resources, whatever. It's a lag indicator of something that's happening today. And if you, unless you invest in that, you should have invested for next year if you're building, invested in it with the kind of vision that Shastri and Bharat Arun had ages ago. And I hope it's happening, but I'm not really sure because all these sparks that we're hearing are about people who burn out after 4 overs in the IPL. And that's all you hear about. And for me, I'm not hearing of a huge queue of pace bowlers that are coming through. And unless you have that,
But like when you say you want the team and the coaches to invest in people and to sort of build that pipeline, you're obviously talking things like preparing themselves in domestic and in sort of tournaments outside of international cricket as well. But like you look at the batting, you've got players who are doing really well in domestic. So a pipeline is being built, but still they're not getting the chances in. So
the senior tour is playing. There is also an A tour that goes around the same time. Even this time in Australia, you had an A team that was making the rounds and did reasonably well.
When Nitin was talking about fast bowling and all of that, I couldn't help but think of Ishan Sharma and the absolute transformation that happened to him in 2015. Not directly attributing it to Kohli versus Dhoni or the way Dhoni used him versus the way Kohli used him. It may have also been that he reinvented himself. He may have also discovered new skills. It may have been a regeneration within by Ishant himself. But there is no disputing the fact that Ishant under Kohli was a completely different bowler. I mean, he was spectacular. The kind of control. So you were talking about the fact that India doesn't have a third seamer now. Ishant was immense in that role. And again, I think largely goes unsung for India's successes in those first 5 years or so. And his final memorable performance, I think, was England in 2020.
21.
21. Yeah, 21. Sorry,
21,
yeah.
yeah.
But,
And I think in a sense, Ishant began that as well because the test Nitin mentioned initially about Rahane's 100 and the win there, the second innings obviously was the Ishant spell.
Yeah.
And before we move on, one other Ishant spell that I'd like to mention is the 2017 Bangalore test against Australia.
Macha, everyone I have spoken to has seen that test match. Okay, like it is insane how it is basically Gundappa Vishwanath's 97 in Chennai. Okay,
Or the tight test.
every
Or the
single
tight test.
or tight test.
Okay, I'm sure at least 3 people in this group were at that test match. I was.
Yeah, I was all 5 days as well.
There you go. Best ever.
I was in Bangalore, but not for the test match. But when I saw Ishant's send off to Smith, that face, I was like,
Machan, get to the program. You were at the ground. I'm telling you, you were.
No, this is very on brand for Vishal because he is a native of Melbourne who did not show up on Boxing Day. So this is just very on brand. Everybody else from every corner of the world, it's like Boxing Day was like the Times Square of cricket, right? If you know someone who watches cricket, he is likely there.
I was watching
Except for
from the
this guy.
top. I was on the plane. I was watching right from the top.
But that
Yeah,
series,
he did
right?
come on
One
data.
test that I would have liked to have been at in that series was the Dharamsala test, right? Where in that series.
We all want to be in Dharamshala.
Let's talk about this a bit more. Yeah,
Well,
let's Dharamshala.
if
Test
I
matches in
look at the
Dharamshala.
last 10 years, right? For me, that Dharamsala test, and actually, there's another marker at the start of the decade. In 2016, we didn't play that many test matches. There was, I think, something against South Africa or something like that. But Kingston, I mean, winning in West Indies 2-0 was the start at 2016. That win, I can't remember where it was. There were one win, then a draw, and then another win. The first win had Ashwin performing phenomenally. The second one was a draw. Who's doing that?
Dravid played Ashwin at number 6.
Six, I think.
in
5
that
or
series,
6 or something.
right? And
And
he
he scored a
got
century.
200s.
Two
He got
hundreds or
200s.
something in the series.
200.
Yeah.
200s, right?
And Bumrah bowled, I think, one of his most magnificent spells
Oh, wow.
where he was swinging the ball.
Trick shots.
That's right.
Yeah, it was a trick
And then the
shot.
second was a draw, and the third one again. So Amit Mishra and Ashwin bowled in the first two tests. For some reason, Amit Mishra he bowled well. You're talking PDP about how bowling is changed quite regularly. He sat and Jadeja played the third test, and if he did really well in the third test, we won that again. So that series was 2-0. So that marked the start of the series in some sense, right? And then we come to Bangalore, Kanpur, Dharamsala, which was, of course, started with Pune, right?
Let's-
and then
yeah.
and then this famous test match in Bangalore. So if you want to pick up, which is your best test, I would say, for me in the start, the way we played in Dharamsala, and that's where Kuldeep Yadav, who made the ball talk and got Warner out after Warner started crazily before the lunch, and then he got him out, caught brilliantly in the slips and all that, and then that started the entire test match with Rahane. In fact, that may have been the start of our WhatsApp group also, because famously after that test match, in our LLL group, it all comes back to me. In the LLL group, which Chuck was adminning, Nittu, myself, and Tony were going gangbusters talking about the Dharamsala test. And Chuck said, guys, there's too much cricket happening over here, just bugger off and go and form your own group. And that's when, after the Dharamsala test, famously, that in a sense, this cricket podcast probably, the birth of that was the Dharamsala test. And I famously remember Nittu said, Ajinkya Rahane will be the best captain India ever had and all that sort of stuff. And then Kohli captained India brilliantly. For many years, I would call Rahane.
Ajinkya Rahane, 0 losses. 4 wins, 0 losses.
No, I
Rahane was a
accept that. I
fantastic
accept that.
captain.
But for many years, I used to call Rahane the Prince of Dharamsala.
I'm all right.
So that's when, in a sense, if you want to talk about this decade, which we enjoyed, and especially in the group that we have, I think we have to credit Dharamsala a lot with the creation of the group and, in fact, the podcast itself. In a large way, that's my favorite test.
Yeah, Dharamshala undid all the credit it got with its with whatever happened there or did not happen there in future years. But we have to talk about why and how the entire era came to an end, guys. And I have said this before. I think karma always comes back to bite you on the backside, right? When you least expect it. For me, the absolute zenith of this era was the 2 wins in London, the Lords and Oval wins in 2020, 2021. India leading the series 2-1, going into the 5th test. They're like gangbusters waiting for this to happen. And then the morning of the test match, they say, guys, this test match might not happen because there is a COVID breach and the Indian team wants to go back home or some shit like that, right? And things just go completely apeshit after that, right? Because they come back home, Kohli steps down as captain before the T20 World Cup, and things are not the same again since then. Because you suddenly have a new captain, you lose the WTC final, you lose the 5th test match, which gets played a year later.
Anita, one sec. Do you really think of that as a 5th test match? It's a different team, different captain, different coach.
Sure. Whatever. On paper, unfortunately, it is recorded as 2-2. You're right. India lost that one test match, but won the series 2-1. Yeah,
to my mind, India won that test match. It's the same as saying that Pakistan beat India in India in '99. Okay, they actually did.
1-1.
Yeah. No, it's not. Come on, they beat us in Eden Gardens also. I
2
mean,
1.
I know, but that was WTC. That was Asian Test Championship.
that's what some
80C.
new.
So you're right. You're right with what you're saying. I get
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
that's where the era really started. We only realized it now, but the era began to end. The beginning of the end was, Ravi Shastri was responsible for it, I would say, because of that book signing event. That was the COVID breach. It was Ravi Shastri's book signing event. That was the COVID breach that happened. And apparently, nobody has spoken about this, but I've heard from certain sources that Kohli was the one. Much against what I actually originally believed, because I thought Kohli actually wanted to play that test, but the others were chickening out, and that's why Kohli left in a huff and stepped down as captain. But apparently, Kohli was instrumental in India refusing to play that test match and coming back home because he was worried about COVID, and obviously, COVID was doing a number on these players' minds, right? You also had Ashwin pulling out of an IPL because of COVID, and we had all kinds of shit going down that year in India. So
I think, was
no
it?
disrespect to the players who wanted to back out from potentially dangerous situations related to COVID. But that was the beginning of the end. Because if India had played that test, they would have won that series right then and there. This era would have continued. You would not have had Karma coming and biting us on the backside in Ahmedabad, in the WTC final,
Day.
Big
in
what ifs.
Australia, in New
After,
Zealand.
wait. After all this numbergiri, after all the numbergiri, your reason for why the era ended. Karma. You behave like an asshole, so you lost.
Absolutely. Cricket is like that, boss. Look at it, right? See how the depths were plumbed after that, right? Everything went to pot after that. Your
think baseball
bowling
also
era
happened
slowly
then.
started.
Yeah.
That was the start of baseball, right? It was one of the early baseball victories, so to speak. Yeah, that test match.
Sorry, to completely reduction Rangaswamy over there. Right? I mean,
Don't take panga with Karma, guys. That is the takeaway.
fair enough. I mean, that's one.
Or with Kunal Kamra on a flight.
What they was very disappointed about is he glossed over that oval test where the hero of that test, Shardul Thakur, man.
Shardul. Correct. Yeah, of course. Shardul never created magic after that, by the way. Whatever magic tricks he had in his hand, we saw it in that year. Until
Gabba was in magic.
Gabba was before that, right? Gabba was the start of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Gap,
The oval test was
that
after
was
that.
the end.
Oval test was summer of
Everything
21.
Shardul touched after that turned to shit. Right?
The image is not very good.
Until then,
The reverse Midas touch, if you will.
yeah, Sadim touch. Yeah. Anyway.
So going back to this
no,
Kohli Karma, right? Sorry, brother T. One second. The Kohli Karma thing. You're pinning down the start of the decline to Kohli's, and it's a fair inflection point.
I don't know if it was Kohli.
No.
I'm not blaming anyone.
No,
for
you're
it,
not blaming.
But I think that was
no.
the.
I'm not. That's
No,
not
come on. What is this? No. Wait. The whole thing collapsed because of you, but I'm not blaming you.
I did say I don't even know what really went on. I've only heard unconfirmed reports that Kohli was the guy. And my original theory was that was not Kohli, and I thought that's why Kohli was at loggerheads with the board and hence stepped down as captain very randomly because I think he wanted to play.
On this podcast, we all have a death wish. Okay, first Chops comes and says Kohli is limited player. Then Iman comes and says this, that, and the other last time. Now you are saying.
I'm not blaming him, Dan.
So, but it's a good inflection point, right?
But think about it, guys.
I'll ask this.
The absolute zenith of Shastri Kohli era, okay? That series was that year was just as there was nothing. They could have continued in those roles for the next 5 years. Nobody would have questioned them, right? Kohli could have batted worse than he's batting right now, and nobody would have questioned them. That's how much goodwill they had built at that time. Right? Shastri could have shown up drunk at every single test match, and it would not have mattered. That is how much goodwill they had built. They come back home. Kohli faces the press and says, I'm stepping down as captain. That's it, I'm done. And this was like 2 weeks before a T20 World Cup was about to begin. Right? An ICC event, right? Which India fared miserably at, got bounced out in Sharjah and Dubai by Shaheen Shah Afridi and I don't know, Matt Henry or whoever. And that's when Dravid and Rohit then came and started. But if you remember, everything they touched turned to shit for a while. They kept winning at home, but
Kohli was captain in South Africa also, no? Afterwards. That was his last series.
That was the last series. But he stepped down. No, he stepped down as limited overs captain, continued as test captain till South Africa, where again things went to shit, by the way. FYI. The only good thing to come out of that South Africa tour was the launch of Bits and Pieces podcast. We've all established that. But since then, right, then Kohli goes away and the decline began then. You can always join the dots later. The steep decline happened in the New Zealand series, but if you trace the path all the way to the past, It all began with karma, I guess.
So it's sort of like saying MTV did not start declining when they stopped playing music. Like it was the seeds were sown before when they were like turning towards reality TV.
Amazing. Wow. I think you're right. I'm sure you're right. I have no idea about any of this, but you're definitely correct.
On MTV music analogy and all you brought up, even in the beginning.
Yeah.
So where would you rate this Indian team in terms of the other teams, the great teams to have played this game? Would you how good or where would you place them in the
So
pantheon
we're talking
of
about,
great?
so India has no ICC trophy to show for. All the wealth and all the various things that it has, very few in the last 10 years that it has to show for. For champions,
What are you saying? We have 16 IPLs, man.
exactly. Exactly my point. Exactly my point. No ICC trophy in that last 10 years, other than the one that was won by Rohit and company in the West Indies, right? Nothing to show for. So at least these guys are departing with something in the cupboard, as opposed to a bare cupboard. But other than that, the first half, phenomenal team. Would they have beaten, in my view, the best team we have seen in recent times, which is Steve Wall's team? I doubt it. I really doubt it. Yeah, Steve Wall's Australia
I think
was the best team.
We have no idea how that team would have fared in these conditions,
Understood.
no?
Understood. And with this ball,
The pitches are different balls with DRS,
given all that,
all of
given
that.
all that.
I think
like
it's very tough to say, how would have 92 Imran Khan's team played against, England's World Cup winning team in 2019. Because cricket is just changing so dramatically all the time.
Yeah.
All we can say is, did they, in their peer group, in their era, did they achieve, close to what the magnificent teams of the past did? And this question got me thinking, right? What are the greatest test dynasties of at least the ones that we have sort of had the chance to witness, right?
West Indies.
West Indies, obviously, the entire era with the fast bowlers. And after that, you had, of course, Australia, right, which was Steve Waugh's team and then Ponting's team, the entire 10, 15-year period with 2 runs of 16 unbeaten tests and all is like incredible, right? I would also add 2 more teams to that, to this roster, and not just these two, right? I would add 2 more. One is South Africa under Graeme Smith. The kind of away record that that team had, including repeatedly winning series in Australia. They won 3 series in Australia, right? Which is crazy. And they did not lose in India. They were the one team that managed to come and draw series in India.
Yeah.
Kept beating everyone else at home. That was a brilliant team. It doesn't get credit, right? It's the same thing.
Yes.
If Callis was born in India, he would
be a
be,
hero.
I don't know, Bharat Ratna. In South Africa, he's like, nobody thinks about him.
his wins in Australia included one chase over 400.
Yeah,
Like-
Oh,
exactly.
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and Faf du Plessis and AB de Villiers
AB de
defending an
Villiers,
entire day out,
that's
right? So everything,
insane.
it had everything. I'll add one more team to it, which is Imran Khan's Pakistan guys. I think the kind of stuff that team pulled off with Imran, of course, arguably one of the greatest cricketers to ever played the game. There was a phase where Imran averaged 50 plus with the bat and 23 with the ball for like a 5-6 year period when he was the captain. And that team went and beat the West Indies. They were really good around the world.
They drew in West Indies.
Even winning a test match in West Indies.
Ah,
was a
yeah,
big
okay,
deal. But
okay.
yes, you're right. They drew in
Yeah.
West Indies. They didn't win
Yeah.
in test. I meant they won test matches in West Indies. That was good enough back then.
Yeah.
So these are the 4, I would say, test dynasties. I believe, India's 2015 class, 2015, 2020, 2023, you cut and slice as you want. I don't care when the era ended. Definitely matches all of those, in my opinion. Yeah. I don't know who will win if they play it because it's a
Big
thought
call.
experiment. I don't care.
And
to be honest.
and before we move on, just one quick point on the Callis thing. South Africans getting Bharat Ratna has precedent, so there is still time.
Who got? Oh,
Nelson
Mandela.
Mandela.
Oh, okay.
But to add, Nitin, Imran's team, they beat England in England. They beat India in India.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the only place they beat New Zealand also. I think the only place they struggled was Australia.
Yeah.
But
The only
but
place.
erased by the fact that they won a World Cup in Australia, so everything is forgotten.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would add that. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing win. That in a sense, no business winning that World Cup. They just took it away and then bang, finished. So yeah, that team was. If you stack the Indian team against those, the list of 4, I think Nitu's pulled up really well. And you say that they will stack up. I don't know, but it was good while it lasted. That's what we will say. I still
I'd say-
didn't still have the invincible aura that Steve Waugh's team had, or I wouldn't even put Graeme Smith's team as invincible, but amazing team, no doubt about it. Amazing.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
fear that Steve Waugh's team sort of engendered in its opposition. Maybe it didn't have that. This 2015 era India team was good, was beating lots of people everywhere, but did they seem invincible? I'm not sure.
I will have to look at the stats of how the Australian team of back then performed in overseas conditions, but like it didn't look like they'll lose anything. So at least that wasn't there in our team from 2015 to 2019. Yes, they had started to win and were doing a really good job of it, but not as dominant maybe as Steve O's team. But the one parallel I felt there was there between that team and our team from 2015 to 2019 was that our wins were being brought upon by everybody contributing equally. Like between 2015 to 19, there were no just individual performers. Like our main star batter was averaging more than 50 at the time. Our bowling average had dropped by one third from the previous decade. So that was good as well. And both in home and away conditions. The middle order was starting to fire and starting to score hundreds in West Indies of all places and in away conditions as well. So I think it was just a team effort from 2015 to 19, which is probably the only parallel I would draw to Steve Waugh's team back then. What happened in the second half, 2019 to 2024, we stopped performing collectively. Like we probably had like here or there like star performers, but nothing gelling well as a team. The other thing which was very predominant in 2015 to 19 was that winning mindset brought on by Kohli's captaincy. There's no doubt we had to go after a win, not like what we were thinking here in Melbourne. Right, what is happening? Is there a win? Is there not a win? Are we doing this or not? There was no ambiguity at all, like in that era completely. So I think that very clear mindset and performing collectively as a team are the two really strong aspects from 2015 to 19. And we seem to have dropped off on both those things in the last 5 years. And that seems to be the downfall.
So new captain, new coach,
So,
Vishal.
um,
Looking ahead.
not sure. I don't think the coach changing the coach too quickly would be like a very
First of all,
smart
do you
thing.
guys have quorum to do this without Imam? I'm just asking. I mean,
These suggestions that we bring on here will be tabled for review by Iman Pandey.
Yeah, motion.
Yeah,
The motion will be tabled there.
yeah.
So
Uh, so paparazzi, please wait. But anyway, I think it is too soon to probably change the coach. I think there needs to be a bit more time given. But what we really need to change is some of our batting, some of the seniors, like people like Rohit. Clearly, I mean, that one interview he did, yes, very bold, very boisterous, very Tapori like and everything. But to me, it didn't spark any confidence. On the contrary, it seemed like why boss, what will it take for you to like sort of step down still? So there are still, even after this series, there are thoughts about what is he going to do and where is he going to play and stuff, whereas the decision really should be don't captain, don't play, just stay away, just cheer for us on the sidelines. That's all we want. So yeah.
Basically, what Tendulkar does for Mumbai Indians. That's what it is.
which Tendulkar are you talking about, Nitin?
Great question.
Priya Tendulkar.
one more point I'll just quickly add. Same thing in terms of comparing to the greatest. I mean, for fans who had been brought up with the relatively slim pickings of the 90s, obviously this team looked like a generation and class apart. And like Nitin said, the zenith of that 2021 series in England, where we got back from positions where you could think that there was no place that we could lose from. We could bring the match back into our favor. I think the Lord's Test is the perfect example of that, where it was a wild twist and turns. But I remember as a fan, I kept thinking that we'll like find a way. Like, I'm sure like we are going to find a way, which I think exemplifies what this team was about. But Vishal's right that it was not a team which was miles ahead of the rest in all conditions that you would always think they would start as favorites. But it definitely was a team who would always be in the hunt no matter where the series was, no matter what the conditions were, no matter what the composition of the team and the opposition was. So yeah, I mean they would probably not eclipse two or three of the all-timer teams and runs that Nitin has talked about, but they would definitely be up there. So it would be the same way that the India went to the 17-18 Australia, sorry, 18-19 Australia series or the 2021 Australia series. You would think even winning a test would be an achievement, but they go and win a series and come back, which is phenomenal. Which is exactly how I would think those hypothetical series would also play out.
Let's also, as devil's advocate, we say Sena is the gold standard. This team won 2 series in Australia. They didn't win a single series in the other 3
Yep.
countries
Yep.
Came
through
close.
this era. So let's
Yeah.
also coming close. Yeah,
No,
of
no,
course.
no, no.
Coming
Again,
close.
we got to really talk about that England series.
We haven't even come close in South Africa, by the way. We have not even won a test match in New Zealand. What come close are you talking about?
No, I'm not talking about New Zealand.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the England series. What you talked about, the inflection point with Kohli leaving, right? That we should have won that. We have won that.
South Africa and New Zealand, we have not even come close. Just
Yep.
pointing it out. That's all. Yeah.
Like, guys, New Zealand beat us at home. Do we really want to like go and beat them in there? It's not worth it. Let's just
Oh wow.
let's not talk about New Zealand. Should we? It's just
I think myself, Prashant, and Tareque should take responsibility for whatever.
We completely owned up to that one.
India were a great test team. When we went to Gaul, India was still a great test team. In fact, during that tour is when Rohit Sharma led that charge against Bangladesh, which was not the test match we were watching.
And then we started making fun of Glenn Phillips.
And everything went to pot after that. I think Glenn Phillips, yes. Anyway.
But I mean, if you leave aside that New Zealand series, what New Zealand series? We don't remember New Zealand series. If you leave that aside, right? India's dominance at home is actually not that dissimilar to Australia's. They only lost test matches. They only lost test matches. They did not lose series. I think for the first 5 years that we're talking about, 2015 to 2020, they only lost one test match. One test
To
match
England, right?
in 5 years, and that was
And that was a
no,
Pune
that
one.
was to Pune.
Australia.
That was the only one. Given that conditions between 2015 to 2020 were not as sort of radicalized as they were 2020 to 2025, that's even more creditable. I mean, the fact that you've maintained that kind of a home record.
Agreed.
And I think over the entire period, I think they lost hardly 4 of 5 games. I mean, I don't think they lost more than that until the New Zealand series, which was kind of blotted that copybook.
Right.
So
cry more that it is over.
cry more. Okay, guys, we'll probably round off with your favorite recollections from this period. Most memorable personal performance, most memorable emotional moment, whatever it is.
Where do you want to start? Because I suspect we'll all start probably with one or two of the favorites.
What, Bangalore 2030, which all of us saw.
Who do you want to start with is what I'm saying.
No, but what is the specific question? Is it favorite test match? Because we've kind of spoken about
kind of
that.
talked
No.
Or do you want
I'm
like
saying
a moment.
a moment or a performance, or
Some moment.
So I'll go first. For me, it was Sydney in 2018 because there's a test match happening in Australia, and it's raining, and one team is saved by rain,
Yeah.
and that team is not India.
Yeah.
That for me was mind blowing. The fact that we were touring Australia, we had thrashed them before, and we were about to rub their noses in it. And the rain came and saved Australia. And people were talking about how rain had saved Australia on a tour that India was on. That just felt like something else. I mean, I will never forget how I felt when I heard people say that, when I read pieces about that particular test. That was the Kuldeep test. Where
Do you remember? Do you remember Pujara's dance move?
Yeah. So you go, Nitu.
I'll pick something left field. Why not? Shardul Thakur, guys, on day 1 at the Oval. That India were 120 for 8 or something, and Shardul comes and lumps a 30 ball 50, including a couple of very, very agricultural heaves over the leg side, and I think one straight down the ground. He takes India close to 200, and India, of course, go on to win that test match, right? I remember thinking during that day, like, what the hell is going on with this team? How is this even possible? How is this fellow coming and saving this team from 120 for 8? Is there anything this team cannot do? Yeah, and that really was the zenith. I remember that test match very fondly. So, yeah, Shardul Thakur. If I were to pick one more moment, it would be Washington Sundar hooking Pat Cummins for 6.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. The Gabba moment was a great one. I'll pick the same series that Nitin's talking about, and that is why the same thing that Nitin said, which I was saying as well, which is that it appeared that this team could not lose in any situation in that series. I think the ending moment of the Lord's Test just imprinted in my mind because I think James Anderson was the last wicket to fall, and
Siraj gets Anderson.
just kept on running like to the end of the stadium at the other side with the stump in his hand. Kind of reminded me of 1983, same ground. So that remains one of my favorite moments of that entire series or entire stretch.
What a test match. I think for me it is that same test match just a bit earlier. I think the last day we were not in a good position. We were
No.
6 down. I think Pant was batting. I think he nicked one off Robinson and then all hopes died down because we only had like a 20-run lead in the first innings and we hadn't scored much in the second innings yet. And then Shami and Bumrah,
Oh,
they're just
wow.
knocking
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
bowlers off the park and suddenly take us to like 300. And like, yeah, and we have to declare, like, imagine we have to
Yeah.
declare after scoring like 120 runs after Pant was gone. We only lost one more wicket. And then suddenly we are in a position where I think Kohli is saying to the team that we have to give them 60 overs of hell or something
Yeah.
these next couple of hours, and then they just pull it off miraculously, and then Siraj does his magic in the end. So but yeah, at the start of the day, like it didn't look very promising, and then when Pant nicked off, it was looking further worse. But yeah, the unlikeliest of heroes. But that batting was like just something else to watch. Very exciting.
I was reminded of the Shami Bumrah, the Shamra partnership a few days back in the company of a few of you guys when Boland and Lyon were batting at the end of day four. It was exactly the same situation,
Pain,
exactly the same feeling.
painful.
Australia went from a place of being in deep trouble to, okay, maybe we can declare 9 down
Yeah.
and set India a target. Yeah.
But
Sorry, go on.
sorry.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say that even that line, no, let's give them 60 overs of hell. It's such a cheesy line. It's like the sort of line you'll get in like, B grade sports movie. But at that time, he actually sold it, man. He had the team to do it. You could see it in his eyes.
Yeah,
As cheesy as the line sounds, it did not feel cheesy then. It does not feel cheesy even now. I mean,
yeah,
he had the attack and he actually did it. So it was really, really cool.
yeah. And that was the
Yeah.
first test of the series, right? So all the momentum
Second
with
test.
India.
Oh,
Second
oh.
test, yeah.
India should have won the first test. It rained on
first
the
was a
last
draw,
day.
yeah.
India had about
Yeah.
140 runs to win with 9
Yeah.
wickets in hand at Nottingham, and it rained out. Yeah.
Damn, that fifth test being taken away from us was like a child being, to take
Yep.
to that very first analogy of the birthday party. Like I've been dressed up and I'm ready to go to the party, and then suddenly they say, "Oh, the party is cancelled and you have to stay at home." It felt like that, and then suddenly the captain goes down, team changes happen, England start learning a new technique of batting, and then we lose the fifth test. But yeah,
I was going to go with Shardul Thakur as well. Not quite, of course. No,
Hey.
no, wait, I was, but I'm changing.
Archamav.
No, I'm changing it. Simply, I mean, there is one shot that Shardul Thakur plays in the Gabba test, which is so phenomenal. It's an offside cover drive. Vivian Richards, just a copy of that cover drive. That I
I remember this.
cannot forget that. Which is why he's been exactly. Which is why he's been. I really like this kind of a player. But I'm going to go with the recent win in Perth simply because it gives us hope into the future. Not the test match. The test match itself was fantastic, but the build up before the test match, everyone's talking about 4-1, 4-0. Australia being, fantastic. India just lost 3-0 to New Zealand. They're a horrible team. They're in disarray. They're practicing indoors. They're scared of Australia. Nothing is going right for them. And then that first spell from Bumrah that set the scene. I mean, that spell where Labushane is falling over himself, his feet are up in the air. As it is, he does some Kathakali when he bats. But this was, a grotesque form of Kathakali, and his stumps have gone somewhere. His LBW looking a bit silly, and then that entire spell in the first 20 minutes of that Indian bowling, something quite special. We haven't seen that kind of fire for a long time from an Indian opening bowler. For me, that's a huge memory. For me, that also sets the scene for what the future could look like. So that's why I'm going with that.
Okay, on that note, this is all five of us looking back on a birthday party, thanking you for your company. And please do give us 5-star ratings wherever you
Yeah,
listen to podcasts.
that is our return gift.
And that is our return gift. And please do like, share, subscribe, and pass on the word about Bits and Pieces, the friendliest cricket podcast on the internet. Bye.
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 bye.